This is the surgery of Dr Michael Fitzpatrick here in Hackney. We are interested in finding out what a GP, Dr Fitzpatrick, makes of the government's newly launched campaign Change4Life.
The Change4Life campaign is really the latest wave of government intervention in people's lives around the issue of health. And we've seen a whole series of these over the years where the government has found health as a very convenient sort of issue on which it can try to make contact with the public at a time when it feels really a lack of a relationship with the public and a certain sense of a loss of authority and respect in society. So they look to issues of health to provide that. And obesity is the latest wave of that. And they've launched this sort of crusade based on the idea that the population of the country is at grave threat of illnesses related to increasing weight. Now that's a very dubious proposition because there's much research to show that the idea that the country is greatly threatened by increasing obesity is really not soundly based in science. There tends to be a great exaggeration of the scale of the problem. There's an exaggeration of the number of people who are overweight. There's an exaggeration of the risks to health of people being overweight, and a tendency to create the idea that because if you're very overweight it's bad for your health, that also if you're a little bit overweight it's bad for your health, which actually is not the case. In fact, a moderate degree of being overweight is not particularly bad for your health. In fact, it's better for your health than being slightly underweight. So there's a tendency to exaggerate the whole scale of the problem. Well, the first thing to be said about the campaign to get children to take more exercise and to eat a different sort of diet is there's virtually no evidence that that's of any benefit in relation to their health. There's a great notion that the whole problem of modern society is because people don't take exercise, and if they do take more exercise, they'll be have a better health. Actually, if you ask for the hard evidence for that, it's very difficult to find. There's a general prejudice that our children are turning into couch potatoes, that children spend more time watching television and in screen-based entertainment, and this is causing long-term ill health. If you ask for the evidence for that, it's very, very difficult to provide. It's very doubtful, for example, whether children take any less exercise now than they did 20, 30 years ago. There's also very little evidence that trying to persuade children to take more exercise, firstly, that it actually results in them taking any more exercise, because children are notoriously resistant to being bossed about in these areas, but that even if they do, that improves their health. That also applies even more to diet. People claim that there's great associations between, for example, eating fruit and vegetable 5 a day campaign, one of the previous campaigns launched by the government.
Yeah.
The evidence that links eating 5 a day fruit and veg to better outcomes is non-existent. The big studies in the States that have followed up people pursuing these kinds of diets have shown a negligible improvement in their health as a result of that. So there's a great deal of wishful thinking and prejudice around these sorts of campaigns when the evidence that they produce these benefits is non-existent. In the meantime, it just creates a climate of anxiety around issues of health, which is not to be underestimated in its problems that it creates. The government's campaigns around these sort of issues, particularly the obesity campaign, creates a great deal of prejudice against people who are overweight. There's a general notion that to be overweight now is to be a social deviant, to be a pariah, in the way that smokers have become over the years. Now people who are overweight are regarded to be unhealthy, to be diseased, to be the notion of obesity as an epidemic disease creates the idea that fat people are a contagion. They're something that people should avoid and shun. And people who are overweight find this very demoralizing and stigmatizing and depressing. And one of the other consequences of this is to make particularly young people, teenagers, excessively anxious about their weight, and indeed their parents to be excessively anxious about their children's weight and about their children's exercise and diet in relation to this. And as a GP, I certainly see many parents bringing their adolescent children who may be a bit overweight, usually not very much, but they're desperately anxious that this may have long-term adverse health consequences, and they feel that they need to take drastic action to deal with this. But usually that is not really necessary, and a much more relaxed attitude to the whole problem would be much more beneficial, as indeed existed in the past. Many adolescents were a bit podgy, they got older, they were more active, they lost their weight, and they lived happily ever after. Now all these issues are surrounded by a tremendous amount of anxiety, which transmits itself to children, it transmits itself to parents, And it creates a whole climate around this issue which has a lot of negative consequences, and one of which is the growth of eating disorders, which has already been a long-standing problem among teenagers and who are well known to be concerned about body image and shape and weight and all these issues. Now that there's a whole national campaign around the issue, not surprising to see we're seeing more teenagers who are more anxious about weight and more teenagers following bizarre diets and not eating at all and becoming anorexic and all the consequences associated with that. And the long-term health dangers of those conditions are very serious, potentially. We've seen over the years governments have sought to make health issues more political issues. And this reflects, on the one hand, a sense that governments have less capacity to deal with what used to be regarded as political issues, in other words, matters of national economic policy, of running the economy, of running the industry of the country, of running the trade policy of the country, of dealing with foreign affairs. There's a general sense that governments have much less influence in these matters under the power of global big corporations on the one hand, or global economic political powers on the other hand, and that government can do less and less about these sort of issues, and hence they retreat more and more into dealing with issues of personal behaviour of people in society. And that seems to be a general trend which has led politicians to pick upon issues such as health and personal behaviour in relation to health to a much greater extent than they used to. And for example, when governments used to interfere in health, it used to be to create the wider conditions for society to be more healthy. For example, like providing good sewage and water provision, which was the great 19th century public health issues. Now it's about how people live their lives, what food they eat, what they drink, whether they smoke or not, whether they take exercise or not, what they do with their leisure activities, how they conduct their sex lives. These are all have now become matters of government intervention, and that is often mediated through the sphere of health. Indeed, many areas which used to be regarded as areas of personal morality in these matters have now become more medical matters dealt with as public health issues. Now, in terms of the role of medical practice in these areas, this had a very big effect on medical practice. You know, when I first became a doctor more than 20 years ago, doctoring used to be about the diagnosis and treatment of disease. You know, people got sick and they went to a doctor. Doctors tried to work out what was wrong with them and tried to come up with a diagnosis and then tried to provide them with some sort of treatment. Mm-hmm. That's history. The effect of these sort of campaigns has been to mean that the role of the doctor is not in relation to a person that comes along and says, "Doc, I'm ill, I need some diagnosis and some treatment." It's about managing the lives of the whole population, because the idea is that you need to tell people how to live their lives with the idea that that prevents them from becoming ill, even actually if the evidence that the behaviour that you're recommending doesn't have much influence on their health. And so we have medical practice redefined away from the diagnosis and treatment of disease to the regulation of people's lives and to the organisation of people's lifestyles, or the preaching to people about how they should live their lives, with the idea that that will help them to live longer. I fear it won't help them to live any longer, but it will mean that they live rather more restricted and confined lives, justified in terms of the quest for better health.
Finally, I would like to ask, it's a situation that affected me when I was in school. I terribly hated Jamie Oliver for what he did to my school dinners, completely got rid of all the good stuff. I would have preferred chicken and chips, which we ate after school because we didn't actually eat lunch. How bad is chicken and chips for our bodies as the government tries to make out it is?
Well, chicken and chips is a perfectly reasonable meal for anybody. It's a combination of protein and carbohydrate with a bit of fat. It's a pretty good meal for children, growing children.
Yeah.
And, it's like anything else. It's probably best if you didn't eat it every day of the week. You need a bit of a balance in your diet. But chicken and chips is a perfectly reasonable meal for a child to have in the course of their school day. I went to school, we had bread and dripping sandwiches for dinner. Absolute rubbish. We had very poor quality school meals. Nobody ever thought that was doing the nation any great damage. And, we no doubt might have been better off if it had better quality food, but we survived on it. The nation seemed to be, moved forward in those days. Now the nation is supposed to be going to ruin because children are eating, as you say, chicken and chips. I mean, it's nonsense.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fitzpatrick, for talking to us. It's been very interesting and revealing.